Welcome to the Real Estate Investing Club. This is the place everyday real estate investors gather to share their best stories, biggest insights, and favorite tactics to grow a portfolio of cash-flowing properties in today's market. Here's your host, Gabe Peterson.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Club. Today we have Trevor Oldham with us. This is going to be a unique episode because we are talking about kind of a meta topic, being a podcast. Trevor specializes in helping investors get on podcasts to raise capital, help with their coaching program, all that stuff. So we're going to dive deep into a kind of niche aspect of marketing in the real estate industry. I am super excited. Trevor, thank you very much for hopping on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Gabe. Excited to be here and excited.
Absolutely. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned the company Trevor's founded, Podcasting You. So podcastingyou.com is where you can find that if during this episode you guys have any questions. Trevor, I mentioned before we got on here, we like to start with stories. We like to hear how people got started down the path they're on. I'm sure you got a good one. Why don't you take us back to the beginning? How'd you get started in real estate?
Yeah, most certainly. And looking at my story, I believe it starts back in 2015. And at that time, I was running a different company, and I'd started my own podcast back then. And I was booking the guests for my show. And some of the guests that I had interviewed were Jay Papasan and David Osborne, very successful real estate folks themselves, especially Jay Papasan. If you ever read his book, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor, he co-authored that with Gary Keller. You know, and being able to interview those folks really introduced me into the world of real estate. I went out and I got my real estate license at 19. Unfortunately, never did anything with it, but I was just super interested in real estate and wanted to go out there and get my license. So went out there and then went out there and did that. And then from there, fast forward about 2 years of that company that I was running. Unfortunately, it didn't work out between my partner and I. And I sort of just started freelancing my skills that I had learned. You know, I was booking my own guests. I was editing my show. I was doing my own show notes. And one day I came across a turnkey real estate investor based out of Los Angeles, and she wanted to go out there and get booked on podcasts. And I thought to myself, well, you know, how hard could that be to book her on shows, picked up with her. And then really over the course of 3 years, worked with a lot of different niches outside of real estate and business and doctors and business coaches and just all these different niches. And I realized after about 3 years of running the business, I just enjoyed working with real estate investors. They're the nicest group of folk to work with. I get the most benefit, you know, from talking to them. And I just enjoyed it. And then, you know, I made that decision about 2.5 years ago now that I only want to work with folks in the real estate space. And that's really just how it started. I never really thought I would be specializing in real estate. It sort of just happened and morphed its way through the company of, you know, just learning the different niches that I like to work with. And then you look at real estate as a whole, there's so many different niches. You know, I thought I was sticking to one niche, and then, you know, we got a client that's coming to us multifamily, and then self-storage and mobile home park. Then I learned, you know, mortgage notes and private lending and real estate debt funds. And there's all these different aspects of it that's just absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, real estate, putting it all in one category, just real estate, it really, you know, when you're looking as an outsider, you just think real estate is everything, and then you start get into it and you're like, holy crap, there are a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different avenues to actually execute in real estate, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. But I love your story. So you started a podcast yourself in 2015. What was the topic of podcasting, of your podcast?
Yeah, so at that time I was running like a motivational based company, and I guess motivational based self-development sort of company, I would say. So it actually grew rather quickly. We had 100K Instagram following. We had like 400,000 followers on Facebook. And I was just interviewing very successful entrepreneurs and business owners and real estate professionals. And that was sort of the niches I wanted to look into their self-development routine, see what they're doing, see how they built their businesses from the ground up, and got to about 60 or so episodes and, you know, super awesome podcast before I eventually, you know, stopped doing. I kind of wish I did, because we were getting quite a bit of downloads, and I can imagine how much it would have grown in the 5 years since then. But, you know, you live and you learn from it.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you say that. I actually, when I started this podcast, it must have been 3 years ago. I started 2 podcasts simultaneously. It's right when COVID hit. And I just, you know, before that, I had been out there networking, and now I couldn't network. And so I was just trying to find some way to keep meeting people, learning from other people. So I started these two podcasts. The second one was called Pursuing Greatness, and it was just like in the self-development category, because I just wanted to interview people that were not in real estate. And it was a lot of fun. Podcasting is one of my favorite things. And even if we're going to talk about real estate today, but it is beneficial to every type of business out there, to run your own podcast, not only for your own knowledge, but also for your branding and all that stuff. So let's use that as a segue to jump right in. You, as you said, you specialize in real estate podcasting. You help people get onto podcasts, which means there's demand for people to want to be on podcasts. So let's go over that first. Why do you generally see investors like myself, like all the guests who have been on my show, why do you see them wanting to go out there and get on a podcast like this?
I find the biggest reason that they want to go out there is to get more eyeballs on their company, no matter what they're doing. And more often than not, the majority of our clients, they're folks that are raising capital, and they can never have enough leads in their business. Typically, folks, I believe it was a statistic, or it was about 40% of podcast listeners have a household income of more than 250K. And say if you have a 506C deal and you need that accredited investor, they're not that shy, or maybe someone in that household, is earning that 200K a year alone. That's really the biggest reason. And that's the first reason. And I would say the second reason is that it gives their brand, or gives their company, more of a real look and feel. People have heard of them. They can put their interviews that they do on their website. They're an actual real company, and it sort of just helps them to promote themselves in that sort of sense, where, their company is a real company, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing. I even found that myself. And it's interesting how people perceive authority. Obviously experience is the number one in authority, but if you just have that little podcast, something that you can show that you've been out there and other people have recognized your authority in the space, and you've been on somebody else's podcast, they interviewed about real estate, that gives other people a sense that you are an authority in the field. And they'll trust you more when it comes to doing deals, all that stuff. And so it really is a good tool, to put in your tool belt. The stat that you just said, though, kind of blew my mind. You said 40% of, was it REI, real estate investing listeners, or 40% of business podcast listeners are, fit within the 506C, $200,000 or more per year bucket?
So it was in the real estate investing space, and I can't remember the study that I pulled from, and I only know this because I basically wrote an ebook. If you go on our website, it'll probably pop up, and I'll say like the 7 shocking things you should know about before going on a podcast. And when I was pulling statistics to show people
That's
how
a good
great
title, by the way.
Thank you. And I was trying to pull some statistics to show people how great podcasts are, and I saw that stat. And that was probably about a year or two ago. So, the income might have increased from there. But I know, I'm not just saying that. There was some study out there, and I think I might even link the study in that ebook. But yeah, it really blew my mind, how many people, the percentage of people that listen to podcasts relative to how great their income is. I mean, you could imagine, if you're spending time listening to a real estate podcast, you're trying to better yourself, or you're trying to build your real estate business. Those are folks that are typically, probably be a little bit more wealthier than someone that's not listening to podcasts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Which also makes sense to go on a podcast to raise capital, because if 40% of the listeners are fit within the 506C category, then that's your target market. It's amazing. So across all your clients, how many podcasts do you generally suggest people go on before they kind of see a critical mass of seeing the benefit in their business?
I typically recommend about 10 or so podcasts. That way you can get diversified enough, because there might be a podcast where we place one client on where they might get 10 leads. We place another client on that and they get no leads. It's just how the audience reacts to their story. It could be a certain place and time or what they're talking about. But yeah, typically I recommend about 10 or so podcasts, and you sort of want to make it like an ongoing part of your marketing strategy. If you expect to do, one podcast a month, it could be hard to see results, especially when it comes to the podcasting space. And I don't think a lot of people know, obviously if you're a podcast host, but a lot of times hosts, probably someone similar to yourself, you have a backfill of episodes out there where I could do the interview today and it could be released in 6 to 8 weeks. So it could be a little bit longer of a cycle. And especially like, let's say we're booking the interview out 2 to 4 weeks, and then we have another 6 to 8 weeks to release the interview. It could definitely take a little while before you to really start seeing your results. So again, some interviews you might do and the interview might be out in a week or two, but for the good majority of them, it could take about 4 to 6 weeks from the time you do your interview to the interview being released. So a lot of people don't know that, and it's hard to keep them in mind because we'll have someone come to us and they're doing a capital raise, and they have an end date of when they can raise that capital, and they might give us a 2-month time frame, and it's going to be nearly impossible to get help them raise capital in that 2-month time frame because we're not, I would say, not miracle workers. We can't make the podcast host publish an episode that's up to the guest. The host has that rite of passage. So that's just something to really keep in mind. I would also say as a guest.
Yeah, and that is true. In fact, most people who come on this show, and they haven't done a lot of podcasts in their history, they're surprised when I tell them, we're 2 months out releasing episodes, and so this episode that we just recorded isn't going to go live until, this specific one probably won't go live until the end of January, beginning of February, and we're recording this on December 16th. So there's definitely a lead there. So it makes a lot of sense that if you do want to use podcasts as a marketing avenue for your business, for your real estate business, you should probably start sooner than later so you have that backlog out there. So outside of the specific podcast itself, do you guys do any repurposing? This is something that so many people have told me that I need to do with this podcast is repurpose it, put it on other platforms, and I just haven't done it. I'm mostly focused on my actual real estate business and not my podcast, but it's something that I know really helps people grow their real estate, their get their message out there, grow their brand. So is that something you help people do, is repurpose the content, or is it just the booking?
Yes, it is. So that's something that we added as a service. I want to say back in May. It wasn't something that we ever, really thought of offering. But then it's funny enough, we had a couple of clients come to us and say, "Hey, can you help take my interviews and turn them into social media content for us, or take them and turn them into short clips on YouTube?" So that's kind of how it got started, just our clients asking us. But yeah, that's something that we do, and it's honestly, I handle all of that on our side of the company. I handle all the editing just because I know I really enjoy that aspect of it. I sort of just kind of like starting my own podcast. I self-taught myself everything, and I sort of enjoy the challenge of making the clips better, making them more professional, and some learning curves definitely along the way. I had to give I would say the first couple of people that had a steep discount. Sort of use that as my learning curve, and we had to bump up the prices as we got better and sort of thing. But yeah, I love repurposing content. And that's a big benefit of going on a podcast where you could take like a 30-minute interview and really create almost like a month's worth of content. You can create 10 to 15 pieces of content, and especially if you're going out there and posting it on like LinkedIn or Instagram, where it's 30, 60 seconds of a clip, or if you go on YouTube, you might have 4 to 5 different videos of you talking for 3 to 4 minutes at a time.
Yeah. It you really do get a lot of content just within one episode. And damn it, I've been saying that I need to do that for months now, and I just haven't done it. So one of these days I will repurpose the content from this podcast. But we're rounding out our 15 minutes. We try to keep this show around 20 minutes. Before we move on to the quick question round, though, I do have one question: do you have any tips and tricks? Well, actually, 2 questions. Sorry. First question: at what point in a real estate investor's journey should they consider jumping onto a podcast?
Before we continue on with today's guest, I want to tell you guys about a community I'm launching on School to help investors like yourself grow your own portfolio. In this community, you'll get access to all the docs I use, all the systems I've built, everything I've used to grow my own portfolio, as well as instructions and guidance on how to get out there and find great deals, how to finance those deals, and then how to manage them for great returns. Since we're just launching it, the price will be set at a measly $20 per month, and whatever price you join at is the price you'll have for life. We will be increasing the price as the group grows, so if you're at all interested in growing your portfolio along other investors, now is the time to join. I will put the link somewhere in the bio or on our podcast website at therealestateinvestingclub.com, so if you are interested, head on over there. With that said, let's get back to the podcast.
Yep. So I typically say someone that's been around at least 3 years is my recommendation. you're going to want to be someone that, I say 3 years with a grain of salt. We're at the same point if you're someone that's been in a year and say you have 1,000 doors or 1,000 units and you have, at least $10 million asset under management, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get booked on a podcast. There are podcasts that are, say, for people that are a little bit newer in the space. Maybe they've just done their first fix and flip, or they just, they rent, their house hacking and have a duplex. It's just going to be a limited amount of podcasts. And the reason I say this is we have had clients that have been in the space for 2 years and they have $5 million, in assets under management, which is phenomenal. That'd be amazing if I was someone that was doing that. But at the same point, a lot of times we'll get feedback from hosts that they just want them to have more experience. So I don't want someone to waste their time trying to shoot for the stars and go on these podcasts. But again, there are still podcasts out there for focusing on people that are newer in the space, and that might be worth your while. But if you're someone that's raising capital, you're going to want to be around the space for a little bit while. The last thing you want to do is you go on podcast and an investor calls you up and they're asking your background. Hey, how long have you been in the space? 3 months. I know as a passive investor, I would be a little bit leery investing if someone has only been around the space 3 months, but say they've been in the space 2 years and they have, 10 million in assets. I might take a little bit better look at them, but yeah, it's really all relative. If you're someone that's super successful in the first year, could be worth your while. But if you're someone that's just starting off, it typically would tell you to hold off.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have turned away a number of investors who are just getting started. Not because I don't, I have all the respect for people just getting started because, we all are at that point at some point in our career. It's just that, when you're just getting started, you don't have a ton of wisdom to share with the audience, and that's one of the other things. But it's not to say don't do it. I feel like like you said, there are podcasts out there who do have people with a little bit less experience. And it's a great thing to start. So the last question before we get into the quick question round is tips. This is kind of a meta topic just because we're on a podcast, but for people who are looking to get onto a podcast, what is a tip that you would recommend or give to them when they, jump on the podcast themselves?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing I'd recommend is having a professional microphone. It's just going to make your sound quality a lot better. I find too many times folks think that they can do an interview with their AirPods or just doing it off their iPhone and speaking into the phone or whatever phone that they may have. You can really go out on Amazon, buy a good quality mic. I personally use the Blue Yeti. I think it's like $100. If it's budget conscious, you can buy the Blue Snowball. It's about $50. And there's obvious audio technique. If you just go on Amazon and search microphones, you'll see that they have plenty. And you just want to have a good quality microphone because no one wants to listen to an interview where it sounds like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah, actually, that's funny you said. Blue Yeti was the first mic I bought. I've since gone to the Shure, but I could not get the I don't know all the audio words, but I couldn't get the ratio right, and so my voice sounded super scratchy. But a lot of people, if they're better than me at technology, they definitely know how to use that one. All right, that moves us to the quick question round. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Well, let's do it. Starts with books. Give me 2 recommendations, one for general life wisdom, one for real estate specific.
Sure. I would say the first one for life wisdom would probably be The 4 Agreements. That's one of my favorite books.
First person to say that, one of my favorite books. Great.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. And then I would say real estate. It's sort of like real estate, but life. I would say recommend The Wealthy Gardener. It's basically a book, and it's about a parable of a gardener per se. But it's basically the dad's writing the book to his son. And the premise of the book is the dad is a chiropractor in real life, and he built up a passive income stream of $200K a year, I think, through doing single family rentals and multifamily deals. But it's just a phenomenal book. He built it up over 20 years, and you realize like the hard work that goes into building a successful real estate business. And that's not a book I hear too many people talk about. I think Brandon Turner posted it on his Instagram about 2 or 3 years ago, and then I went out and bought it. And I was like, wow, this is one of the best books I've ever read, and try to read it at least once a year.
Nice, man. I love it. So what's the name of that one again?
The Wealthy Gardener.
Writing this down. Wealthy Gardener. All right, I am picking that one up. I love books that share wisdom, but in a story form, like The Alchemist, stuff like that.
Yep.
Really great books. And 4 Agreements. Surprisingly, you are the first person on this podcast. We're at episode 300 something. You're the first person to recommend that, and it's one of my favorite. And I'm just going to list it off here because it is one of my favorite books. And the 4 Agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. super great book for anybody who's out there kind of into the wisdom, self-improvement kind of genre of books. So great recommendation. I'm going to move us on to the next question. This is for your younger self. So go back to the Trevor who had no experience in real estate, no experience in podcasting. He was just buying his first mic. Go to him, look him in the eye, give him one piece of advice moving forward.
Yeah, I guess the best piece of advice would just be fail faster.
Mm.
I think too many times I let what other people would think of me, especially early on starting the business, saying, I'm not good enough, or I don't know what I'm doing. And that sort of prevented, I think, growth where I could have grown quicker. I'd rather fail quicker and just make mistakes and not really care, what other people think. And that would be the biggest thing for my younger self.
Yeah. Yeah. Failing faster is it's hard advice to really take in because, nobody wants to fail. But you do have to fail in order to succeed, because there are things that you just don't know and don't know you don't know. And that's just how it is. So great advice. I'm going to move us on. This next question is about strengths. We are all gifted with strengths that we uniquely give this world. So what is your Superman strength?
Yeah, I would probably say my Superman strength is just perseverance. Just overcoming so many different challenges, whether in my business or my personal life, things that have happened, just having to bounce back. And to give you like an example of in my personal life, where last year, actually about this time, looking about a year. So to give you some context, I like to work out about 5 days a week, and I ended up getting my COVID vaccine. So this is my third shot. Woke up a few days later, wasn't feeling good, couldn't breathe. Ended up going to the doctor and got diagnosed with myocarditis. And for those folks who don't know what that is, it's basically I had inflammation in and around my heart. It can be like a very sudden. Basically, it's like the leading cause of sudden death in young adults. So it's pretty scary. So I had to spend time in the cardiac, unit at the hospital. Couldn't work out for 3 months. So I was like, what am I going to do during these 3 months? So I ended up doing yoga every day. Try to do that. I'm from New England, so Tom Brady pliability. Work out in my living room, because I literally couldn't do that. Walk, I couldn't run, I couldn't lift any weights. And, I'd been working out for 5 years, and all of a sudden 3 months, I can't do anything. It absolutely crushed me. And, now I'm, all healthy again. But yeah, that was an instance where, I was thinking I was going to celebrate the new year and end up spending the day or spending the night in the cardiac unit in the hospital. I'm 25, so that's usually not an issue. I think of heart problems, being this young.
Yeah. Life's it's gonna hit you in the gut every once in a while, and you just gotta move on. Yoga is one way to do that. It's surprisingly hard to do yoga.
Yeah,
I did it a few times a while back. I haven't done it since, but it is definitely an exercise. All right, that moves us to the next question. This is mentors. None of us are islands. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. So who is one mentor who has contributed significantly to your career today?
Yeah, I would say, when I'm thinking through, I would probably say the biggest, not someone I met in person. I think for me, it's been Jim Rohn. Just listening to his wisdom and reading his books and watching his YouTube videos. And it was funny, when I was taking and got my real estate license back, when I was 19, I won a raffle, and it was a CD set of Jim Rohn's like best talks. And I used to just drive around always listening to him. And, unfortunately he passed, but just his wisdom and listening to how his talks and reading his books. And then you also have Brian Tracy, another early on sort of person. No, not as early on as Napoleon Hill, but in the 90s and 80s, just reading their books and just taking their wealth of wisdom. And, that was really before you had the influencers of today and how they dominate. You had these really business professionals going out there and speaking, and they weren't doing it for likes and clicks or notoriety or anything like that. They just wanted to share their information. So yeah, definitely Jim Rohn, just following his teaching has been phenomenal for me.
Yeah, I haven't listened a lot to Jim Rohn, but I used to really like Zig Ziglar, who is kind of fits in the same category.
Yep.
Really great guys. Their messages are timeless. So yeah, makes sense. Let's move to the second. Nope, I think that was the second to last question. Now we're on the last question. You've given us a lot of good advice, a lot of good wisdom. I'm sure people want to reach out, learn more about Podcast You and about how podcasting can help their business. So what is the best way for anybody who wants to reach out to you to get in contact with you?
Sure. Yeah. So they can go to our website, podcastingyou.com. So podcastingyou.com, or they can feel free to check me out on LinkedIn under my name, Trevor Oldham. Feel free to connect, shoot me a message there. Happy to chat.
All right. Yep. That's podcastingyou.com. I will put that link in the show notes. So if y'all want to reach out to Trevor, just go ahead and click a little more in the description. It'll pull down the full description, and in there you can find Trevor's link. All right, Trevor, that wraps it up. Thank you very much for hopping on the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. For everybody who's here with us today, thank you for showing up. You are the reason we do this. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever, reach out to me, Gabe at therealestateinvestingclub.com. Other than that, hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic week. Keep rocking real estate, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
All right, before I officially sign off, I have a quick announcement to make. If you're interested in becoming a passive investor in one of my deals, my own company, Kaizen Properties, is looking for capital partners for our upcoming projects. We invest in what are known as recession-resistant assets, mainly self-storage facilities, mobile home and RV parks, and industrial properties. If you're interested in investing and would like to learn a little bit more about my company, our investing criteria, and some of the previous projects we've done, go to the Real Estate Investing Club podcast at therealestateinvestingclub.com and scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page. Click on the Invest With Us button. That'll pop up the investor form. Fill that out, and we will reach back out to you as soon as we can. Or if you prefer a little bit more of a personal touch, you can reach out to me at Gabe at therealestateinvestingclub.com. So really, that is it. Again, it was a pleasure hanging out with you guys during this episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.